Hello, UFC fans. Welcome to a UFC 278 episode on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in Billy for his UFC pay-per-view advice, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. See all my content, UFC, football, baseball. We got it all here. Also, check out the Big D podcast for your audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. Well, if you can see from the background, he will Action Network, FantasyLabs MMA. He's your guy, my friend Billy Ward. Billy, you ready for UFC 278 this weekend in Salt Lake City? I hear there will be a few fights that will go into the entrance of us.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I gotta say it's not one of like the best pay-per-views I've seen in a while. A lot of times we get two title fights on some of these pay-per-views, a little bit more intrigue in the co-main event. And I always like watching Kamaru Usman, but we're kind of getting into that GSP territory where you go, am I really buying this guy they're putting in front of him as a legitimate challenger, or is this just another, easy work for Usman, who is like a roughly 4-1 betting favorite as of Tuesday, and I expect that to be a little bit longer by the time fights kick off.
Yeah, so talking about the main event, it's Kamaru Usman against Leon Edwards for the welterweight title. And when you think of Usman, you think dominance at 170 pounds. Is Usman potentially the best pound for pound fighter in the UFC? Obviously, we've seen Volkanovski and Charles Oliveira dominate fights recently, but is Usman in that contention for the best pound for pound fighter in the UFC today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the conversation is pretty much just Usman and Volkanovski, and if either of those guys were to able to go up a weight class and win another belt, I think that would cement their case, or just take on a wider range of challengers here. Usman's defended his title 5 times, but it's against 3 different guys, and it was Masvidal, who wasn't really a legitimate threat. I don't think anyone saw that twice. And then he's beat Covington twice and Burns once. And, while Covington is probably clearing away the second best welterweight on the world, none of those guys really seemed like a legitimate challenger, at least the second time around. And, Volkanovski fought Max Holloway 76 times or whatever. So when one of these guys can really clear out a division, then I think we'll be able to firmly say that one of them is the best welterweight in the world. For Usman, that probably means stopping Khamzat Chimaev if he gets a title fight sooner rather than later. And Volkanovski, his opportunity might be going up to 155. It's obviously easier for featherweight to go up 10 pounds to 55 than it is for Usman to go all the way up to 185. But he's a big, strong dude. I don't think he would ever fight Israel Adesanya, but if Pereira takes the title off Adesanya, could we see Usman go up and, wrestle his way against Alex Pereira to a second title? That wouldn't shock me. So, yeah, to answer your question more directly, he's one of 2 people in the conversation. I don't think it's particularly close with anyone else. With all due respect to actual champion Charles Oliveira, that we're pretending is not the champion.
So obviously we saw these 2 guys fight before, and Usman does what he has done to practically everybody: win and dominate. So how do you think Usman will go at Edwards on Saturday night?
Yeah, I mean, that was a long time ago. This was 2015 when they were fighting. Like, Barack Obama was president the last time these 2 people fought. So both these guys have came a long, long way since then. Edwards had criticized Usman at the time for being just a wrestler, and I think that was fair. He came out and he won a unanimous decision, didn't really work too hard to put him away, definitely wasn't trading with him. And, Edwards was just a striker then and has definitely improved in some other areas too. What I think we're probably going to see is Usman try to keep this standing and strike a little bit more than we usually do out of him. We've seen that the last few fights where he's kept things more or less standing, but he's fought, a wrestler in Colby Covington, an excellent jiu-jitsu guy in Gilbert Burns. So it's hard to say whether he's going to keep that game plan in here, whether he's really fallen in love with his hands, or whether he was just fighting guys where the matchup dictated that. I think the smart strategy for Usman would be to dominate him with his wrestling. I know Edwards just came a long way, but he's so much smaller. He's nowhere near as physically strong as Usman. He's a tall, skinny guy. Like, all of that makes a pretty easy path towards success on the ground for Usman. But you see these guys, they fall in love with their striking. They were wrestlers, but they like trying to knock people out. That's I guess my one concern here is that if Usman doesn't take the smart choice and tries to put on a show or win a highlight reel knockout, I think that's the only path I could see for Edwards winning. I'm not even sure that Edwards is the better striker, but it's certainly close on the feet, where Usman is just clearly the better grappler in both wrestling and jiu-jitsu than Leon Edwards.
I mean, and if you're the Leon Edwards camp, you're hoping this is a boxing match, because if this is a wrestling match, Edwards is going to end up on his backside the whole night.
Yeah, certainly. And, Edwards, I'm sure, has been working, trying to defend takedowns, working the range. It's the bigger cage and a pay-per-view. Not that really changed anything for Usman, who's fought almost exclusively pay-per-views for a while now. So, does Edwards, I don't think Edwards has much of a chance to stop the takedowns. It's just whether Usman initiates them or whether he gets a little bit overconfident in his striking and then wants to trade with him.
Yeah, because we've seen a few upsets. So, I mean, I suspect Usman wins, but you think this is a convincing win, or is this going to be one where everybody's put asleep thinking, why did I spend $70 for a crappy fight like this?
Yeah, I gotta say, I've enjoyed Usman's fights even when he's not knocking people out or tapping them out early. Like, I thought the last fight with Covington was pretty entertaining, even though it wasn't like a dominant stoppage. Usman made it clear he was the better fighter in there. And I think that's probably the likeliest case. From a DFS standpoint, it's a really interesting question because Edwards is super cheap, throws with a ton of volume, certainly has ability to put up points, but you're weighing whether you think he can last long enough in there to make it interesting. And then Usman, in DFS standpoint, you just play him anytime he's fighting. He strikes at an above average rate. He attempts takedowns at above average rate. Most dominant fighter out there. Like, that one's a no-brainer. So, I think that's going to be the real storyline here. It's not so much whether Edwards can necessarily win, but whether he can make this a compelling fight or if he just gets ran through. And we kind of start saying, I'm a little bored with Usman. Of course, if we get to that point, we've got Khamzat lurking, which I would love to see. I kind of wish they would have just rushed Khamzat to the top here instead of doing Edwards again. But Edwards deserved it. He's been on a streak. He's beat everyone they've asked him to. He certainly deserves the chance. I just don't know that means it's a close fight.
And I'm guessing for both of us, just play both title fighters, because unlike a lot of UFC pay-per-views we've seen recently, there's only one title fight, so play both guys.
Yeah, for cash games, I'm probably 95% sure that's what I'm going to be doing. I don't think fading Edwards is necessarily terrible in this one. Just if you think Usman comes out and dominates, you don't score a lot of points lying on your back. When we get these back and forth stand-up matches, like we saw with Cruz and Cheeto last weekend, both guys put up a lot of points. Cruz mixed in some takedowns, Cheeto got some knockdowns. It was perfect. They both scored a ton. If Usman really does come out here and do his GSP impression and wrestle him the whole time, Edwards could go 5 rounds and only score 15 points or whatever. I don't think that's the likeliest scenario, so I will be playing both of them. And then real quick, from a betting standpoint, if you want to bet Edwards, you can really get some good prices. I'm assuming at least on Edwards by knockout. And I think if you're going to bet him, you might as well play that because he's not winning rounds or minutes against Kamaru. Could he catch him? That's a little bit more likely. And then this line's just going to get better and better throughout the week if you're on the Edwards side. It's already moved from, let's see, what is it? He's at 310 now, but just yesterday it was for Edwards. He was 280 yesterday and 310 now, and that's Tuesday when we haven't seen a lot of action yet. So yeah, if you're betting this one, I can see the case towards Edwards. I'm not laying the minus 400 or whatever on a favorite. Just too many crazy things can happen. And yeah, like you said, for DFS, I think it's probably play both guys in cash. I don't really see a super compelling reason not to, unless you think Edward or Kamaru just does lay and pray the whole time.
And Edwards gets 15 points, and we're wondering who Usman's going to fight next.
Yeah, it better be Khamzat. I'm going to keep saying that until Dana White listens to your podcast and makes it true. Can we just see Usman versus Khamzat? Like, I'm just not assuming he gets through this one. I don't just really believe anyone else in the welterweight division has much of a shot against him.
Yeah.
And then sneaky one, year or two down the line. But if Sean Brady keeps dominating, super, super good grappler, which I think would be an interesting matchup for Usman. So it might be the one guy who wants to play jiu-jitsu with Usman, which I think would be fun. I don't think he's at that level yet. Sean Brady, that is, but big on Sean Brady, big on Jeremiah Wells. Like those Renzo Gracie Philly guys, I think are going to be pretty compelling against Usman in a year or two.
Yeah, so the co-main event on Saturday night is a middleweight fight between Luke Rockhold and Paulo Costa. Thank goodness you give me the easy names for this card. So what do you see with this fight? Because we haven't seen Rockhold in a long time.
Yeah, it's been over 3 years since he fought. Both of his last two fights were knockout losses. Although, Jan Blachowicz and Yoel Romero, so nothing, shameful in that. But it's been almost 5 years since he won a fight. I think this is a tremendous fight. It's interesting that they're both going down to middleweight when they've both fought between middleweight and light heavyweight in the past. As I shouldn't say down to middleweight. But yeah, I mean, this would have been a tremendous fight in 2019-ish. Here in 2022, I'm not really buying it as a legitimate co-main event. I don't see either guy really challenging for a title at any point at middleweight or light heavyweight for that matter. Costa's last two fights were a knockout to Adesanya and then a loss to Marvin Vettori. He's pretty clearly not one of the top 2 or 3 middleweights. Rockhold is getting up there in age, hasn't won a fight in forever, 37. I don't know. I think Costa handles this one pretty easily. Big questions on Rockhold's chin after all those knockout losses and the layoff. And Costa's probably a better jiu-jitsu player at the very least. I wouldn't say grappler overall. So yeah, DFS standpoint, I'm going to mix in some Costa. Don't really love it. Don't think I'm going to be betting it with Costa as a fairly big favorite, but I don't know. There's not a lot I'm interested in this one. I think Aldo Dvalishvili should be the co-main event, but we'll get to that shortly.
Yeah, this seems more like a GPP fight because I don't think I'd really like either guy for cash because both of them are coming off some knockout losses. So I think this fight ends in a KO one way or another, but I don't like this for cash. This seems more like a tournament play if you like stack 150 in an MME.
Yeah, even that. I mean, Costa's fairly expensive since he's such a heavy favorite. Let me look up real quick exactly what he's at.
8,700.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a ton of volume, doesn't really go for takedowns, so you pretty much need a knockout from Costa, and you need it to be kind of early for that to pay off, which is certainly not out of the question, the way Rockhold looked last we saw him. On the flip side of that, a guy got knocked out in his last couple fights, but those 3 years off help a little bit. It's not like he's been constantly taking damage in that time frame. I don't think Rockhold has much of a chance of winning, but can he survive? I don't know. I'm just not super compelled by this one. I'll mix in some Costa, maybe like one Rockhold lineup if I do 5 or 6, just on the off chance he's done really well in his time off. And we haven't seen Costa be very active either. He's fought basically once a year for the last 4-ish years. So I don't know if that plays into it, but yeah, not one of my favorite fights. One of the reasons I think this is kind of a weaker pay-per-view from a entertainment standpoint.
It's certainly not the pay-per-view with all these great superstars, champs, and exciting fights. And we've got a decent main event, but we don't have the history making or potential superstars that we've seen in the last 3 or 4 big pay-per-views.
Well, I mean, we kind of do. They're just not in the co-main event. They're in the third fight on the card. I don't know what to call that, co-main or whatever you want to say, but love this fight between Jose Aldo and Merab Dvalishvili. I thought Aldo was done a couple years ago. The guy had been in a ton of wars for all these years. And then what does he do? He rattles off wins over Chito Vera, Pedro Munoz, and Rob Font. You can't ask much more out of that. I think Aldo's, close to fighting for a title and probably should get the next title fight if he gets to Dvalishvili. But Dvalishvili's been winning like crazy. Another one of those, former Soviet grapplers that we see that just comes out and dominates people with takedowns. He won the 2019 Combat Sambo World Championships on, I don't know, 5-ish. Oh, it looks like 7-fight winning streak in the UFC after dropping his first 2. So I'm super interested in this fight. Can Aldo keep it standing long enough against a guy who attempts like 5 takedowns per round to work his game plan? Is Aldo going to chop him down with leg kicks? Is Dvalishvili's striking come forward enough to make this interesting if he isn't able to get him down? It's a great fight from an entertainment standpoint. It's a great fight from a DFS standpoint. Dvalishvili's takedown volume can put up a ton of points, and Aldo's a super accurate, super high intensity striker, and it's the 8,200, 8,000 fight, which is almost always one of the ones we want to target. I'm all in on this one. I don't know why this isn't the co-main event. Like, someone needs to explain that to me, why we should care about Paulo Costa and Luke Rockhold more than these two. But yeah, I don't have strong opinions on who I think is going to win at this point on Tuesday. You know, close lines, close DFS salaries. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts if you got anything for me.
I know this. If I were 150, one of these two guys would be in every one of my lineups.
Yeah, you know, I will say from a DFS standpoint, I think the upside on Dvalishvili is a lot higher just because he could get 2 or 3 takedowns in a round. You know, Aldo might get taken down, scramble back to his feet, but that helps from DFS because he could rack up a bunch of takedowns. Neither of these guys really needs the stoppage at their salary to pay off in DFS. So yeah, I'm with you. I think we're going to have a lot of exposure to this one. It's a sneaky one. You know, if you don't like anyone else in that price range, I wouldn't even hate playing both of them in cash games, which I normally don't do in 3-round fights, but there could just be enough action in this one that, you know, Aldo racks up a lot of striking points. I think the dream scenario would be a late knockout from Aldo with 5 or 6 takedowns along the way on the other side. I probably won't do that. I'll probably end up taking a stand by Saturday, but I don't think it's a terrible strategy.
Yeah, I mean, look what Dominic Cruz did in San Diego. I mean, even though he lost in the 4th round, racked up a lot of points.
Yeah, and this could be similar. You know, I don't like it as much when we only get 3 rounds to work with, but like you said, it only went a couple minutes into the 4th. So even had Cruz not gone into the 4th, it still would have been a pretty solid score there. So yeah, you know, it's certainly possible. The lighter weight classes, there tends to just be more action. The guys don't really get tired. I mean, Jose Aldo just doesn't get tired. You know, 3 straight decisions. Some of them I think were 5 rounds. I'll have to check. But so yeah, there could be a ton of action in this one when they only have to do it for 3 rounds. Again, really wish this was the co-main, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah, and one fight I'm really looking forward to seeing is Alexander Romanov, because have you seen some of his scores in the UFC? Not just 5 wins, but submissions, knockouts. I feel like Romanov should be the most expensive fighter on Saturday night.
Yeah, and he might. I don't know. It's probably well. We'll get to the fight after that, and I'll tell you why he isn't. But yeah, I get that. I just think the matchup with Tybura is just scary enough that I get why he isn't. You know, Marcin Tybura is no joke. He lost to who was it in his last one? He lost to Alexander Volkov. Not a ton of shame in that. He was on a win streak before that. At least 4 in a row, a couple knockouts, knocked out Great Hardy, knocked out Walt Harris. And Romanov hasn't really fought tougher heavyweight competition so far. You know, submitting Chase Sherman doesn't really impress me, especially with Sherman taking that on like 2 weeks' notice. Knocked out Jared Vandera. I mean, cool. So it's definitely a step up in competition for Romanov, but he's 16-0 for a reason. He's definitely the A side of this one. I just think, you know, it's a scary one from DFS because with these big boys, anyone can get knocked out pretty early. And if nobody gets knocked out early, sometimes we see kind of slot fests where there's just not a lot of points overall. So I do like this fight. I do think Romanov is the sharper side. I'll be trying to get to him. But I'm going to mix in some Tybura for sure, especially at his price point for DFS. And it's a good test. It's a good test for Romanov, you know, really stepping up to a borderline ranked competition for the first time. Or ranked. I guess they're both ranked at this point. So we'll see. You know, we'll see if he's really a title challenger down the line or if he's just going to be a top 10-ish guy who hangs out in that area.
It's Romanov's. It's weird because I know it's Tuesday, but I feel like Romanov could be a cash play, but you don't seem that confident in him, especially with the big boys, because either you get an early knockout or snooze fest, where they just deplete their energy reserves.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's necessarily what's going to happen, but that's always a risk, right? With heavyweight fighters. So I'll probably try to find the salary to get to him. I got to see how the rest of my lineup shakes out. And I'm not going to sacrifice another spot in my lineup to find the extra money to play Romanov. If I can do it comfortably and have some cheaper plays I like, he'll certainly be in there. Just because, like you said, I mean, there's certainly a case for him being the most expensive fighter on the slate. He's minus 450 or so already. I certainly get it. But, you know, to transition here to the next fight on the main card is Tyson Pedro versus Harry Hunsucker. And Tyson Pedro is the most expensive fighter on the slate because Harry Hunsucker is pretty terrible. by UFC standards.
Let me guess.
So,
He sucks, right?
I mean, I'm never going to say that about these people who could, the heavyweights in particular could beat up both of us at the same time. And that's with me as an ex-professional fighter, right? I'm not saying that as some geek off the streets. So I'm never going to say these guys suck, right? Like, it's hard to make it to the UFC. It is. But when we're comparing it to UFC standards, I mean, he's not good. He's been in there twice. He got knocked out by Tai Tuivasa. Okay, no big deal. Tai knocks out everyone. Then gets knocked out by 4-3 Justin Tafa with a head kick. That's not great. He's coming down to 205 when he had been fighting heavyweight. I don't think that really helps him. He's the smaller guy in there against Tyson Pedro, who's got 1 inch in height, 4 inches in reach. Pedro had a long layoff, like 3 years. Comes back, he gets Ike Villanueva, who basically finished with leg kicks, and now gets Harry Hunsucker. So shout out to Tyson Pedro's management team for getting these fights, because this is just an awesome way to get back into the octagon. And yeah, I think, Pedro is, I think, the safer play between him and Romanov. We're spending a bit more. It's another 500 in salary for that. But yeah, I really can't see Harry Hunsucker beating any legitimate UFC competition at this point in his career.
Yeah, it's just more, maybe not a better fighter, but for Pedro over Romanov, but way less competition from Hunsucker.
Yeah, and I mean that's if you're Tyson Pedro, that's what you're supposed to do. Like I think it was Sean O'Malley said, I want the easiest fights for the most money. Maybe that's Paddy Pimblett. I don't know. One of those guys who gets a lot of easy fights for a lot of money. But yeah, I mean, if you're doing this for a living, this isn't for fun. This isn't to prove how tough you are. Like, you're trying to provide for your family and set yourself up. Yeah, I want to get in there and fight guys who are, 0-2 in the UFC for my comeback fight. I'd love that. Great. Like, give me those fights. So, love that for Tyson Pedro. I think we find the 9,500 for Pedro. And then if you can still find another 9,000 for both Usman and Tybura, great. But I'm not going to, or for Romanov and Usman, do that. But definitely the priority is going to be getting up to Tyson Pedro and Kamaru Usman for me, with Romanov coming in kind of also ran in that category.
Yeah. So, how do you think the altitude in Salt Lake City will play a role? Because we've seen umpteen sporting events in Denver, Mexico City, where altitude plays a factor. You think the altitude in Salt Lake will play a factor?
I mean, possibly, but and I am horrible at geography. Correct me if I'm wrong here. It's not anywhere near as high as Denver, correct?
It's like a couple thousand feet low, but it is at altitude.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's necessarily a big case. I mean, it's tough because both guys are fighting in it, right? So when you've got a guy like Usman who trains in Denver primarily, like, probably won't matter for him. I don't think there's a lot of mountains in England for Leon Edwards, so that might, be another point for Usman. But do we really need anything else to convince us that Kamaru Usman's the better fighter here? I certainly don't. So, like, I don't know how much that matters. I will say, I guess, if we're talking about some of these heavyweights, maybe that, increases the odds that we see Romanov and Tybura tire out and don't put up great scores. I don't really have a great betting angle on that, because if they tire out, that could be a stoppage, or it could raise the chances of it going long. But yeah, if that's going to scare you away from a DFS standpoint, I think fading some of the heavier fighters probably makes sense. But I don't know. It's really hard to say, just because both fighters are fighting in the same environment. So how are we going to pick between them?
Oh, by the way, Tyson Pedro's odds -740.
And dropping, I think.
Might be.
I
think he might be like -900 by the time the fight starts.
He already is on FanDuel. The 740,
gosh.
the 740 you're seeing on DraftKings is the shortest odds on him anywhere that I'm seeing right now.
So could he be at that minus 1,000, 1,200?
It wouldn't shock me. I mean, I'm never going to lay that kind of price on guys, especially the bigger guys, just because the variance is so much higher. And, we've seen Harry Hunsucker get caught with a couple knockouts. That doesn't mean he's terrible. Maybe he's just gotten caught early. But yeah, I don't think the odds are great for him.
So it's a very interesting pay-per-view, but I think of one where DFS players are gonna be at a different. I'll be looking at a different strategy because with only one title fight, you won't have to stack 4 fighters. You'll stack 2 in all likelihood, but you won't have to stack 4 potentially.
Yeah, that makes it easier. Or I guess I shouldn't say easier because we're all dealing with the same thing, right? Like sometimes I look at the slate and I go, "Oh wow, this is awesome! I'm gonna score so many points." But we got to keep in mind everybody else is seeing that too. Like if you're sitting there saying, "I hate this slate," so's the people you're playing against. But anyway, bit of a digression. But yeah, I'm with you. 13 fights, pretty standard amount. Nothing really stands out for me. Think probably gonna try to find a cheaper female fighter here just because those tend to go longer. I don't know if it's Yana and Wu. She's not all that cheap. Playing Shanna Young is a little scary, but that'll be later in the week decisions. I will say I really like the prelim fight at 170 between AJ Fletcher and Ange Lusa. I don't know if anyone saw Fletcher's last fight. It was or his first fight, which was also his last fight, if that makes sense. But he fought Matthew Semmelsberger, just throwing bombs the whole time. AJ Fletcher has a 67-inch reach, which is 5'7", which is like hilariously short as a welterweight. But he's this super jacked former football player, so it's going to be really hard for him to cut weight to get to a lower decision. Giving up 7 inches to Ange Lusa, who is 0-1 in the UFC, also lost his Contender Series fight. I think that's just another high variance fight. Both these guys can be swinging pretty hard. Obviously, don't love it for cash games when we have a high knockout odds, but that'll be a fun one too. There's honestly, in the earlier prelims and stuff, there's some fun fights I'm interested in seeing what happens. It's just we don't have that name recognition that we frequently see.
Yeah, it's interesting, but hopefully we do get 13 fights because seemingly like once or twice a month somebody can't fight because they either can't cut weight or they back out at the last minute.
Yeah, I mean, stuff happens. It's a tough sport. I've been there. I've had fights canceled both on my end and the other people. So it certainly happens. I think that's why for a while the UFC was trying to get 14 or 15 on a card, but then too many times nobody backed out, and then they had events that went like 9 hours or whatever. So now they're shooting for that 13-ish range. If they lose 1 or 2, no big deal. From a entertainment standpoint, I actually like the shorter cards because some of these 14 fight cards where it's literally 7 hours, it's a big ask. From a DFS and betting standpoint, obviously love more options, right? Who doesn't want more choices?
Yeah, especially when you're playing for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So thanks for joining us, Billy. We wish you well. Hopefully we are raking the chips. Hopefully our fighters win because we like them when we get dubs, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I've had a real good streak for cash games the last 3 or 4 weeks, even with, some of my betting picks going wrong. So one of these weeks I'm hoping just I can get all the things right on the same week, but that's obviously a big ask. It's tough predicting what's going to happen in the future.
And get that next MMA World Championship ticket, right?
Yeah, I got to start deciding how much of the bankroll I'm going to fire at that one this time because it gets expensive trying to enter those a bunch of times and qualify for the next one, but we got some time.
Oh yeah. So thanks for hopping on. We'll see you later.
No problem. See you down.